At noon on January 20th, Mr. Trump will officially become president. But the person in charge of running the White House will be Trump's chief of staff, Reince Priebus. This week, I sat down with one man who used to do that job. Andy Card was George W. Bush's chief of staff for 5 years. We were curious about his advice for Priebus. You say it's not a job being chief of staff, it's a commitment.
If Reince Priebus thinks that it is a 9-to-5 job being chief of staff, he shouldn't be the chief of staff. It is a 24 hours a day, 7 days a week responsibility. It is a commitment. It's not a job and it's not a career. It's a responsibility, and it's a fabulous responsibility. It's grueling. And one of the burdens that the chief of staff has is that they will know more than the president. That sounds kind of scary, because you want the president to know everything, but he shouldn't know everything. He should know that which is relevant to his need to do the job. And so the chief of staff carries the burden of sometimes knowing more than the president and trying to decide what the president needs to know. And sometimes he'll tell the president something he didn't need to know, and the president worries about it, and that's bad. And sometimes he'll tell him something, he won't tell him something he needs to know, and that's even worse. The emphasis is on staff, not chief. If you're the chief of staff and you think you're the chief, the staff won't follow you. The president is served by a staff. The chief of staff is responsible for the staff, but the emphasis of the responsibility is staff. Staff the president, help him do the job. And finally, I think that Reince Priebus will come to recognize that he should not be blindsided in any policy debate, because if he's blindsided, chances are the president will be blindsided, and you don't want the president blindsided. So the chief of staff, to the extent that he can be, should be as all-knowing as anyone in government.
So then that brings us to the arrangement that we're seeing emerge here, where there seem to be different centers of power. We're not just looking at a chief of staff here, we're also looking at other advisors, Steve Bannon, you have Kellyanne Conway. In a sense, I wonder what you make of that, first of all. Is that something that's really altogether that new? Because some people...
I think it's pretty common, actually. Most presidents have had some kind of important advisors that they wanted to have a closer relationship than maybe some of the other staffers. What you don't want to have happen is centers of management responsibility. I had strong personalities around me, Karl Rove, Karen Hughes. They all had Condi Rice. They could go in and see the president, talk to the president, but I had an expectation, and kind of, I won't call it a rule, but an expectation, that I would know about them going to see the president before, during, or after. Just don't blindside me.
What's the danger if the chief of staff isn't in the know, you think?
Well, that's when you get into problems like the Iran-Contra problem for President Reagan. If you have a chief of staff that is not cognizant of everything that's happening at the White House, momentum can generate problems. And the president might know about them, might not even know about them, but if the chief of staff doesn't, the chief of staff can't mitigate the problem, or he can't put support around those who are looking to solve a problem that needs to be solved. So I think it's very important for the chief of staff to be kind of well engaged with everybody in the staff.
As you know, there have been concerns expressed by some critics about the choice of Steve Bannon to be one of those people who will have access to the president. What is your thought about Steve Bannon?
Well, I'm not a big Steve Bannon fan, I would admit that. But it's not unusual for presidents to have people around them that are kind of lightning rods. And every president during my lifetime has had someone around them that somebody in the American populace said, oh, that's a strange person, or I don't know that person, or what's his job. So I'm not as concerned about it as others. I just don't want, I like it when people have defined responsibility.
Newt Gingrich said this week his biggest concern is that Mr. Trump's administration will get to the White House and, quote, lose their nerve, that they may give in to the challenges of pushing their agenda. And, you know, this is a president who ran an anti-establishment campaign. How do they maintain that message, essentially, where you have people who obviously will have their own issues that they want to push forward, their own agenda items they want to push forward. At the same time, the president wants to maintain this anti-establishment outsider feel?
Well, Ronald Reagan came to Washington, D.C. as kind of an outsider. unlike President-elect Trump, he had the experience of being a governor where he had to govern and lead a legislative body and motivate bureaucrats to do a job. I do think that Donald Trump was elected to be an outsider. He was to come in and change the system. So I expect change. I hope that he will respect the institutions, however. I hope he'll respect, first of all, the institution of the presidency. I don't want him to damage the institution because that will make it difficult for his successors to be successful presidents.
What specifically are you talking about?
Oh, if you accommodate Congress too much in violation, Article 1 in the Constitution is Congress. They're always in tension with Article 2, the president. And they want the president to give them something that will then become a precedent that every president will have to give them. Well, that erodes the authority of the president. And I don't want Donald Trump to erode the authority of the president for future presidents.
What role do you see the Vice President, Mike Pence, playing in the Trump administration?
I think Vice President Pence is going to be one of the most significant staffers for the president. He's going to, the role of a vice president is kind of like being the understudy for the lead in the play. And you hope he doesn't have to take the leading role, but he has to be ready to take the leading role. So he's a president in waiting all the time. In the meantime, he's the president of the Senate. And I hope that he doesn't have to exercise a lot of responsibility as president of the Senate, because that means it's been a tie vote and he has to cast a vote. I'm hoping that he can help guide the Senate to do the right things and motivate Congress. And I think that's what President-elect Trump is planning to do, is have the vice president be the principal liaison to that important body called the United States Congress.
Anything else that you think is important for people to understand about the incoming administration, about the role of the White House Chief of Staff? Anything that comes to mind?
The president's, he is not a dictator. He has to make the transition from a campaign to a governing leader. I've always felt that it's very important for the president to taste his words before he spits them out. Give thought to those words, because literally other nations jump to do what the president says. They pay attention to his words. The American people pay attention to the words.
And the president-elect likes to tweet.
The president-elect loves to tweet. I don't know how he finds the discipline to be so efficient with his tweeting. I do know that he can be efficient with his time, because he demonstrated that when he was on television.
How do you think that's going to affect the presidency?
My knee-jerk reaction was to say the president should never tweet. I don't think that's realistic today. Tweeting avoids the press room. I think it's important for the president to do both. Keep the connection with the people in America, have the courage to stand up and deal with those who are a voice to challenge the president on different policies, and do that by standing in the press corps and having press conferences every once in a while and taking the tough questions.
Are there policy risks involved, though?
There are policy risks if you don't give thought and judgment to the policy before you make it. If you're making a policy decision based on an emotional tweet, you're probably not making the right decision.